You're listening to WKDW Radio 97.5 and KDWRadio.com, broadcasting from the Bishop West. And I did say Bishop West, and I've got to say Bishop West so many times, and I don't work for Bishop West, but Bishop West Realty does such a great job for us. And he says that I never say his name on the air. And I promise you I say his name on the air because I work for Remax Palm, and I still say his name on the air because he's a vital asset to our community, because he put so much money into the radio station and gave us the antenna that made everything possible to go live on the air. So, sometimes you have to praise people in your industry because they do the right thing.
Right.
And I've got a very, very special guest in the house today. And I'm going to tell you, anybody who knows anybody at Bishop West Realty, please share this video instantly with them just so they can hear the beginning. Because I think I've squared away about 4 shows now, maybe 5, by saying Bishop West Realty. But sometimes we have to praise people around us, praise people that are in our own industries, because they're doing the right thing into the industry that we're now talking about, which is really 97.5 WKDW Radio and KDWRadio.com. And then also the podcast capability that I purchased and I stockpile in there. And I really have enjoyed working for the radio station, but that networking together is something that you and I have really kind of been able to take advantage of too, along with all the other city commissioners, and building this dialogue that we're about to have. So kind of talk about camaraderie and the communication and how important it is to be able to have good open dialogue, good sound dialogue, and what that means to a commissioner.
Wow, that's a big question. And I think
it's actually huge.
Huge. And I'll just throw out a little bit of chum into the ocean of this conversation. And that is effective working relationships and good open communications have to come from a place of trust. And you and I off the air have had, I think, hours of conversation around trust and how different people approach situations in very different ways. And some of us are always looking for the mistake or the wrongdoing, or they're always trying to find the negative in, it seems like, everything. But and other folks approach life or work looking for the positive and looking for the opportunity in everything. And I think there's an old saying that kind of sums it up, is the glass half full or half empty for you? And I think people tend to fall into one of those 2 camps. The glass is either half full or half empty. And what bucket you fall into can really color how you perceive the world and how you perceive other people. So I will leave it there, John, for your reaction to that.
Well, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. And Peter and I talked about it. We've talked about it a couple of times on different angles on other shows. And the topics are really cool because I've had some really cool interaction with Chuck English. I've had interactions with Peter Barlotta. I've had interactions with all the commissioners. I'm very blessed in that regard where everybody, the whole panel of Northport citizens that were on and shared their points of view. There's something to be said for actually listening and hearing the other side.
Right.
and not being in that bully pulpit position
Right.
where, take that panel for an example. If that panel would have been all about what they wanted, no one would have been on the show
Mhm.
unless they came in with the attitude of some compromise, or
Right.
at least try to get their point across so that
Mhm.
if there was a compromise, their point was heard.
Right.
And I think it was a great opportunity. I'm going to be working on some other shows as a spinoff on that. But when you're dealing with things, whether it be with the Black Eye group that I run,
Mhm.
whether it be with Northport Athletics when I was the booster president there, whether it was with back in the day Northport Vision Northport
Right.
or Northport Forward. I've talked to
Mhm.
that
Right.
organization,
Right.
and when you shut down lines of communication,
Right.
uh, you might as well run for Congress or Senate or even the president, because they tend to. And I used a word the other day that I hadn't used or heard from anyone in a long time. Cloakroom.
Cloakroom.
Yeah, that's the room behind the Congress where they all go and have coffees and sit down and discuss issues and come to an agreement, and or at least get the discussion started.
Mm.
We tend not to have a room where we just get discussion started. People use Facebook as a bully pulpit, and they
Mhm.
don't even consider themselves a bully on an issue.
Right. Right.
You
Well,
know, from,
and let me just react to
sure,
something you said. When it comes to city government, we don't have a cloakroom. We're not allowed to
correct.
have a cloakroom. So I can't go somewhere with a fellow commissioner and discuss anything that could possibly come in front of the commission for a decision. So, so just to be safe, it's sort of like not talking about anything pertaining to the city. So we don't have a cloakroom. It would be nice if we did, but we don't.
Well, and unfortunately, things happen like that. But our government,
Mhm.
let's stick here for a second because I think there's something to be said here.
Mhm.
We have a brand new city manager,
Well, not so
and
new.
I well,
Not so
not so
new,
new, but
city
I newer to our territory. How about that? And
manager.
he's doing a great job. But one of
Great
the
job.
things that I've noticed is that a lot of times what happens is that because people come from other areas of the world
Mhm.
or the nation, they tend to forget that they have to look into the politics and the structure of what we have today. The
Mhm.
city manager here in Northport is directed by city commissioners like yourself, isn't he?
Yes. So let's talk about that for a minute because we each have our lanes. The commission has its lane and the city manager has its lane. So, as a commission, we're responsible for setting strategic direction, for setting the laws of the city and how we're going to operate, approving the budget, and then having oversight to make sure that the day to day operations that the city manager is responsible for are being conducted in context, in alignment with our budget and with the directives that the commission has given to him. But once it comes to execution, it's his job to do that. It's not the commission's job. Now, if, and here's where folks' point of view or how individually we see our roles, I I have concerns sometimes, or I don't agree with how I see things being implemented That's not my lane. But when I see those things, I have a conversation with the city manager. Now, I am grateful to be able to say that he and I have a very effective working relationship, and it's based on open communication and trust. So the way I roll with the city manager, it's my assumption that he's going to do his job perfectly. Now, is he always going to be perfect? No. But there's a thought process in our country today, and you and I have talked about this, one-on-one a lot, that people approach city government out of the gate from a position of mistrust, expecting that shenanigans are going to happen if we're not riding roughshod on the commission and city staff. And that's just not how I roll. I don't approach the world that way. I see opportunities. I see opportunities for us to really advance the city, to do new and unique things that improve life for a majority of our residents. And that's how I roll. And not everybody sees the glass as half full, if I might go back to that analogy.
Well, and I want to ask you a question though. When the commission asks the city manager, Jerome Fletcher,
right,
to do research and bring back the work necessary for a commission
right,
to make decision,
yeah,
he's not really a decision maker at that point, is he?
It depends. If we're in the realm of execution, implementation, and a decision has to be made, it really is in his authority to make it, with certain exceptions. If it's going to require monies or the application of staff working on a major initiative that wasn't part of the budget discussion or wasn't or isn't aligned with the strategic directions that we lay out at the beginning of the year, then yes, that should come back to us for discussion and direction.
Well, and I bring that up because I've gotten into a couple conversations with people who are really targeting city commissioner Fletcher or city manager Fletcher for making almost all decisions, and we truly don't have that style government here. I say that because a lot of people like myself, we come from where we have one person at the top, the mayor, and he's not the mayor. You're the mayor, but you're one vote out of 5.
Right. So we have a strong city manager, weak mayor form of government. And for folks who are more familiar with private industry, a general example that I like to use, and it's not a perfect example, but it sort of gives you the idea, and that is the commission is sort of like a board of directors, and the city manager is the president. So in a corporate environment, the board of directors approves the budget, sets strategic direction, approves major strategic initiatives. Are they in alignment with our strategic directions? And then the president is responsible for the implementation of all of those things and the day-to-day. And our city manager does have discretion when it comes to the implementation and execution of what the commission has approved in an open meeting.
So you know, that I'm glad we kind of started here because
Mhm.
some really cool things are happening. I'm actually meeting with Mr. Fletcher at the end of this month. I'm going to City Hall,
Mhm.
and I'm going to sit down and have an hour-long discussion with him on
Right,
some topics. And
right.
then I'm also going to have him as a guest on the show on 7/21. So July 21st at 3:05. It'll be his first time on the show. And I've really run into him a couple times and
Mhm.
said, please be part of the show. This
Right.
last time he came across the parking lot, and the first thing he said was, I want to be on your show. And he actually had somebody email me and
Yeah,
initiate that, which is
right,
for little old John, that's kind of a cool thing to have
right, right,
the city manager kind of come at you and want to be part of this. And that's how important this show and the radio station is to try to get information out to the citizens of Northport. I mean, we have a lot going on here. We have a lot of
an awful
good
lot
going on
going
here.
on. Right,
And
right.
I want to kind of talk about what happens at city hall meetings a lot of times because I've presented. Now this was years ago, and I will tell you I was nervous, but it was the first time I presented and the first time I got a 5-0 vote,
Mhm.
and it was awesome because you when you know that you are up against the fence and you're presenting to not just not just commission, but staff is
Mhm.
listening, city managers listening, everybody's listening. And you know what moves people, at least what I saw when I presented, is when you present well, when you're organized, when you're laying out a timeline of things.
Right, right,
And I tell you, I there's just something to be said when you're respectful of what's on the other side. And I think it's both ways. I'm going to say
mhm,
that it has to come from the dais, but it
right,
also has to come from the citizens. That there
right.
has to be, and I'll go with the word because of Jerome, unity. There has to be
Right,
unity on
right.
the decorum
Mhm.
that we have at City
Right,
Hall both ways. It has to come to the citizens and it has to go from the citizens back to staff. And I
yeah.
think when we do that, we can accomplish so much more. And I have called this out. I don't call out by names, but people who go in there and just raise their voices and pound the desk and are kind of combative to conversation, not
Right.
people necessarily, but you
And
can be
sometimes
combative
people,
to conversation.
sometimes to people. I mean, we've seen that too. But it's interesting,
True.
even on that score, John, there's differences of opinion. So I would say even on the commission, there's different levels of tolerance when it comes to decorum. I came up through private industry, high tech. I was trained a certain way in terms of how you treat people, how you speak to people. But again, there are folks, and not just in our community, we see it as well on the national level, that the tone and the attitude and the words used and the voice used is very disrespectful and very combative. And to a lot of people, that's okay. The way I was trained, that is not okay. You've really, when you get to sort of executive levels in big companies and major industries, you better learn how to conduct yourself and you better learn how to express yourself. You can get animated, maybe emotional, but you can't get insulting or denigrating or speaking down to people. You really have to learn how to get your point across in a very respectful way. But when it comes to the political arena, there are people who think it is okay to treat people with disrespect. It's like you're an elected official. We should be able to talk to you in any way that we want. You know, you're a charter officer. We should be able to treat you any way that we want. And I see Chuck English's comment, always be diplomatic. That's a great way of saying it. And I kind of come down to the golden rule as well. Treat other people how you would like to be treated yourself. But I don't know, it seems that these days in the political arena, it's like the gloves are off.
Yeah, we
and
kind of
it's all that.
we've been spinning on that a list of golden rules lately.
Right,
Um,
right.
you know, and I'm going to ask you something a little different, and it still has to do with local politics
Right.
in comparison to national politics, because we're in a hotbed right now of discussion over president and soon to be. I mean, that's been going on now since Donald Trump decided that he's going to throw his hat in much earlier than everybody else. And so
Right.
the topics have been, you know, just flowing out there with kind of ventum on both sides. And I want to use that against them, because, you know, we can all vote in a national arena. We can all do those types of things.
Right.
There's so much to be done at the local level that affects us every day.
Right.
Don't we as citizens, a lot of them for good reason. They're working, they got kids, they're doing schoolwork, they're doing sports, they're doing all these things. But beyond that, for a second,
Right.
there's so much more important everyday things that would affect someone's pocketbook versus even on the national scale. Yes, it's important to vote. Yes, it's important to engage. But isn't it more important to understand what's happening local?
Well, I absolutely. And, you know, I had an epiphany in 2018, you know, at the ripe old age of whatever, just a few years ago. You know, I had always been, you know, paying a lot of attention at the federal level and at the state level to what was going on politically. And I never really paid that much attention at the local level. And this goes to when I was in New England as well, not just here in Florida. And then in 2018, when I helped a friend of mine with his commission election, his run, I really started paying attention to what was going on at the local level. And I had my epiphany, which was what happens locally has much more impact, direct impact on our day to day and how we conduct our business than anything that happens, certainly at the federal level. And what I've experienced since becoming a commissioner is that local politics is way more personal than it is at the state and the federal level. You know, we bump into our constituents at Publix or at events or whatever. Folks in general know where we live. And so local politics is much more personal and in your face, much more so than at the state and federal level. But, you know, I totally get it. People are busy raising their families, working. Some people are working 2 jobs. They don't have time to get involved. But I think it's incumbent on local government to give people a variety of opportunities to get involved. Some easy, doesn't take much time, readily accessible. Others might take, you know, a lot more time. So just some examples, we've had surveys up on the city website where people could weigh in terms of what their priorities are in terms of, you know, our annual budget. And we're in the middle of that process right now. We've had surveys going out and polling opportunities for people in terms of what they'd like to see happen at Warm Mineral Springs. So those are some examples of what the city is doing today to try to make it easier for people who don't have a lot of time, can very quickly and efficiently let their wishes be known. Our current city manager and staff are much more accessible to the community. I don't know how many in-person events our city manager has done at this point. And it's really a tragedy. I think we've had 4 or 5 community meetings with city manager and a number of our staff around the budget. I went to 2 or 3 of them, and there were never more than 3 residents in any of the meetings that I attended. And that is really, really a shame, because there's a lot of information shared, and folks should be, I don't want to say educated, but aware of what decisions we're making today that can impact things like their property taxes, or what they can and cannot do on their properties, and that kind of thing. And it's sad when folks do not take advantage of those, because they have the opportunity to ask questions, not just of city manager, but he always brings several directors with him, the content experts for different types of topics. And, I get it, 2 hours or an hour and a half at night when you've worked all day and, you just want to kick back and put your feet up. But once a year, take advantage of one of those meetings. They're very, very informative.
Well, I'm going to stick there for a second, because I actually took one of those in. And so, from the point of view where I sat, I get to interview a city commissioner once a month. I get Parks and Rec once a month. Mm-hmm. I get Public Works once a month. And I get so many things going, so many conversations going. Right. Then I meet with citizens. I've had coffee with Chuck numerous times. I've bumped into him numerous times and had more conversations. But what I find really cool about going to that was what I saw with people who had been disconnected from the city.
Right.
And I don't care if there's 3. That was 3 that probably didn't know. Right. Now, I'm not happy with the number by any stretch of the imagination. Right. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that's 3 people that weren't involved or were not, how about this, educated with the right information always.
Right.
We have so many people who have agendas, who love what they want,
right?
But yet their interpretation of what is actually happening is a little skewed. Right. And truthfully, it's just natural. It's not with intent a lot of times, but it's what you want, and that's what you hear. How can I describe this for what I want and my end result? Well, just because there's a group of people who has an end result in mind doesn't mean there's not another 3,000 out there that have a different perspective. They just haven't listened to anything.
Right.
And that's kind of where I think that's where we're at. And you corrected me the other day on a number. And what is the average age here in Northport?
The median age, I don't know what the average is, but the median age is like 47. So what is the median? It means that half the population is older than 47 and half the population is younger than 47.
Wow. We let me kind of scoot us out of the way a little bit. Chuck's you want to read that out loud real quick, and then I'll take it off the air.
Do you want me to read it? So
sure, go ahead.
Chuck directed to me, believe Monday's workshop is less about conflict. That's actually Tuesday's special meeting, but integrity, our charter, and the sunshine being let in. Coloring outside the lines. Answer Mr. Fletcher. He is doing the job he was hired to do, but I don't believe has truly brushed up on the rules. Okay, so a couple perspectives of that. Might city manager have communicated, or staff have communicated with the commission in a more timely way? Absolutely. Part of that is we do have people with hired a lot of really great experienced people from outside of, certainly outside of Northport, and some outside of Florida even, who come here with experience based on different rules and maybe a little bit of a different culture, and they're learning. It's a process. So you don't stick a hose in someone's mouth and inundate them with how it's different in Northport in 5 minutes. It's a process. So you stumble over something and you catch flack and you say, okay, I need to do better in that kind of situation moving forward. So there's some of that going on. But what also is going on is different points of view or confusion around city manager's authority, what he can carry forward on his own, and what is really the domain of the commission. And some of those situations are really very fuzzy. And I've read the charter a number of times. I've read our policy, our decorum policy, a number of times. I've read city manager's contract a number of times, and the direction is fairly high level. And when you really get down on the ground, when there's a lot going on, it gets a little fuzzier. And there are some things that certainly they're in the implementation realm from my point of view. And I don't speak for the whole commission on this, but in my point of view, they are within Jerome's purview to decide. But if they start bumping up against a commission directive, then he really does need to have a conversation with all of us as an FYI and just sort of fill us in. And Chuck mentioned on one of his comments, polling. I don't know really what the definition of polling is. I look at it as the city manager keeping the commission informed of what's happening in terms of day-to-day operations. And it's certainly within our purview when we're having those conversations with the city manager to say to him, oh, I really think this one needs to come before the commission.
There you go.
One-on-one discussions with staff is not the same as polling. We're running a city, and it's a fast-growing city. There's a lot going on, and the structure of government sometimes doesn't lend itself to the necessary operation of the city. There are times when a decision has to be made on the spot, and waiting, maybe a month to get something on an agenda just doesn't lend itself to the effective and efficient running of the day-to-day.
And I want to ask you this, though, because, we hire a guy because of his expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And then we kind of bitch that he's using his expertise.
Right.
If we wanted a figurehead, why did we look for somebody that is so much
Who's
more
a powerhouse? Right.
Yeah, I mean, I say that, and I'm not trying to be mocking, but
Right.
It's sort
Right.
of like, looking at a lineup and saying, back in the day, the big red machine, we didn't need Pete Rose. We didn't need Johnny Bench. We didn't need Tony Perez. We didn't
Right.
need these
Right.
guys.
Right.
Anybody can hit the ball.
Right.
No,
Right.
you got these guys because they were in the prime of their life. They were exercising the victories and the teamwork and the camaraderie and the drive. And I say that, and I use sports as a crossover here because truthfully, I don't know that I've seen anybody walk into City Hall and really capture the team spirit
Right.
of not just staff, but the city. I mean, seriously, the first time I heard him speak,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I said this to you the other day, it was Peter Bartolotta got an award. Fred Tower was sick, couldn't give Peter his speech.
Right.
So Peter called me and said, "Can you go up and give me a speech?" And of
Right.
course, that day I did. I didn't
Right.
write anything down. I didn't do anything. But
Right.
the most inspiring thing that truly happened was that was the first time I heard Jerome Fletcher speak.
Right.
And truthfully, I sat there, listened to it, and I used some of his crossover, and I said some similar things. And it was because his style, his ability to be professional.
Right.
Again, we're going right back to decorum.
Right.
He literally is getting attacked by a lot of people out here, and I'll call bullshit right now on that because you're attacking the wrong person on a lot of issues. And I want people to step back and educate themselves, because the true point that all these discussions are for is to calm everybody down and say, learn the right position to speak, get yourself organized, get your team organized, present, but stop using public forums to beat people down because you don't know what you're saying. Because sometimes the people that are beating people down have just taken way too much pleasure in that.
Right. And let me just say, people speak as though city manager is sort of making it up as he goes. That is not at all what he's doing. And even in some of these gray areas or situations where he needs to make a decision in the moment about how to proceed, back to your point of hiring someone who is experienced and well educated and credentialed, is that kind of city manager recognizes that he needs to be hardwired into his commission. And so even in those situations where he needs to make an execution or an implementation decision, it is always in his mind, if I was in front of the commission, how would they advise me? And that's the way it should work. So the way I see it, the way Barbara sees it, it's an obligation on the part of every commissioner to develop a strong working relationship with our city manager, for us to have solid communications and to share our thoughts and what our motivations are and where we want to see this city go. So when he's in those situations and making those immediate, in your face, it has to be now decisions, he's doing it reflecting what he believes the intention of the commission is. And again, as I said earlier, if it's something that might bump up to impacting budget, clearly, if he needs to spend money on something that hasn't been approved, unless there is at a micro level some wiggle room, spend the money on this rather than on that, he can make those decisions, but that needs to be an FYI to the
Right.
commission.
So
And
right.
let me just share an example of something happened recently. And I don't often get in a twist about things, but on this I did. Our director of neighborhood development interpreted our code and some decisions that came down from the Supreme Court that we could no longer allow those temporary signs in the swales. So those and that was a huge outcry. I was upset until I really researched it, and it was within her purview to make that decision. However, years ago, the city commission had approved a sign ordinance. So that did not come back to the commission for an FYI or for a discussion. And that was not the way this commission wants to roll with staff, but that was just an example. I think our director of development services in that kind of situation in the future will immediately come back to the commission for a conversation. So we learn. So we have Peter. Do you want me to read Peter's comment?
Sure, but I want to say something real quick too, because
Okay.
Chuck is Chuck and I have long discussions, and here's the beauty that's happening right here in front of people's face is at no time have we called Chuck out as the bad guy. Chuck is the 100% trying to get his point across.
Right.
And Chuck, if you've taken this the wrong way, please don't. Because the truth of the matter is there's a difference between, and I had this discussion the other day, there's a difference between an argument and a discussion.
Right.
And right now, this is a discussion. The reason we're discussing this is that really the decorum of presentation for a lot of people has to change. And this is the perfect opportunity for them to hear it and understand it and say, well, wait a minute, they could be right. And maybe I should present differently because I'll be more inclusive about my idea. And that changes things. But
more
what's that?
And
more influential.
You know?
100%.
When you're like this, people have a tendency to hunker down and close their minds to hearing anything more from you. And you brought up Chuck. And let me just say, one of the things I love about Chuck is we have had, he and I, some pretty animated conversations on stuff. But you know what? We always hug each other before we part, and we're friends. So
and that's the part about the conversation.
Right. And Chuck and I disagree on a lot, but we really like each other. And
right.
It's not that because I disagree with him, I'm the enemy, or because he doesn't agree with me, he's the enemy. We're still buddies, and that's the way it should be. And because of that, when he speaks, I always really listen to what he has to say, because I learn a lot when I listen to him. I still may or may not agree with his outcome on that, but yeah.
But here's the next question. I'm going to let you read Peter's question.
Okay, so Peter says, let's discuss solutions and their outcomes. Just saying you don't agree does not move the needle. We need to discuss the possibilities and then come to a mutually agreeable solution. And let me just key off a little bit on that and come to a mutually agreeable solution. A lot of times that's not possible. It's not. We just don't agree. And so as a city commissioner, and I've heard Jerome, our city manager, say this time and time again, and I say it also, in those kinds of situations, we have to do the most good for the greatest number of people. That really, at the end of the day, is what we are responsible to do. Now, one of the peculiarities about me is every decision we make, I approach it from how will this decision impact the quality of life of people who live in this city in 15 or 20 years. That drives some people crazy because they're more concerned with today and how is this decision going to impact how they roll today. I'm never going to play in that sandbox. I'm just a long-term strategic thinker. But that's why we have 5 commissioners.
Right.
And we don't all think that way. But the miracle of it is that the fact that we're so different and we listen to each other in the majority, we listen to each other and we allow ourselves to be influenced by each other, and we make better decisions. And I'll share with you sort of one of my major learnings when I was first elected to the commission, and I see Chuck's picture up on the screen again. I can remember Chuck saying to me after I was voted in, and he looked at the construct of the commission, and he says he was very, very happy at the diversity on the commission. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how will we ever be able to make a decision as a group? And I've really, over the past 2.5 years, learned the value of diversity in decision making, but it demands that we speak to each other respectfully and effectively, and that we listen to each other with an open mind and allow ourselves to be influenced without giving up. I want to say our integrity, not the right word, but giving up what we believe to be the right thing. And I use this example a lot. I am sensitive to the environment. The environment is not my agenda. Economic development and smart growth is my agenda. But I have a fellow commissioner who's extremely knowledgeable on the environment. So very often when we're talking about those kinds of things, I shut up and I listen because she's the one who knows that stuff. So, and I think most of us on the commission have listened, and we kind of know how we roll and what our strengths and weaknesses are. And we rely on each other to fill in the blanks when we don't have that particular experience or skill in our arsenal. And that's the way it should work. It doesn't often, but I'm pretty happy with how our commission is working in general.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna take us down a different path here real quick because we've got 7 minutes left, and you're going to be able to spit 7 minutes out real quick. No pun intended with the swallow, by the way.
Right.
Because this is the second time that Chuck has posted it today, and we really have not really directed any of this conversation directly at Warm Willow Springs.
No.
But I'm going to ask that question because I know this is his go-to response to Warm Willow Springs all the time. We're not even talking about putting the Warm Willow Springs project on a referendum at this point, are we?
No. And my question would be, why would we? And when I talk to people about warm mineral springs, most of the people who know anything about it at all say, will you sell that darn thing now? I'm sick of hearing about it. I'm sick of talking about it. Get rid of it. And that's what I hear. But more of what I hear is, I don't even know what it is. Why are we spending money on it?
Right.
And I have to say, as a city, so collectively, and I'll take responsibility for this too, we do a disservice to our community when we don't explain the impact of our decisions. So when we decide to spend $5.5 million on something like Warm Mineral Springs with no expectation of economic benefit, that's a lot of money to spend on something that will be a financial drain. And I think as a city, we've done a very poor job of explaining when we decide to do something, we need to understand the financial impact of that decision. And in the past, some of us have even said that Warm Mineral Springs make money. When we say things like that, we do a disservice to our community because we only take the fees collected and one aspect of the cost of running the springs. We don't include in that a reserve account that we should have been putting aside for the maintenance of those buildings. We don't include a line item for what it costs Parks and Rec to maintain that property, the grounds of that property, and we don't amortize the original cost of securing that property. So if you're in business, we talk about a break-even point. We haven't even hit break-even on that $5.5 million. And we haven't, as a city, done a clear accounting to the community about what it really costs to run that. And I don't have the numbers. I've heard some percentages thrown around, but when you have 90%, and don't hold me on that number, but it's probably close. When you have 90% of the people enjoying the springs who don't live in the city, and the rest of the city subsidizing their participation because the fees we collect to use the springs don't come close to addressing all of the costs of managing and maintaining something like the springs, that doesn't jive in my mind. That really.
Well, I love the conversation, but I want you to address this because it's another go-to for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've just said and what that reads is not the same thing. But go ahead and address Chuck's statement.
Okay, so Chuck says, so are our parks a burden? Which one will be next for a P3? The environmental park? He and I have had this conversation with the I-75 Sumter interchange development. I don't get that connection. So here's how I feel about parks and Warm Mineral Springs in particular. We operate our park assets, all of our parks, our community centers, and our aquatic center at a loss. And we do that deliberately because they contribute to the quality of life. With the acquisition of Warm Mineral Springs, the original acquisition, we paid that money with the county to develop that property to be an economic benefit to the county and the city. And midway through that process, there was a change in the composition of the city commission. And so we spent $5.5 million. We bought the county out to buy Warm Mineral Springs, and we really did that without a plan. We didn't go to referendum to ask the rest of the city if they wanted us to spend $5.5 million acquiring that property. So from the very beginning, there was a difference of opinion in terms of what we should do with that property. Should we develop it to some level so that it allows the city to tap into the incredible tourist trade that Sarasota County enjoys, and we do not as a city, but doing something with Warm Mineral Springs that would make it more of an attraction to a broader audience of people, and not so much to go in the springs, but to have other assets in the vicinity of the springs that would be a draw. That was the intention of many of the commissioners at the time when that property was bought. Certainly the county commission bought it with the idea that it would be an economic benefit. So, that's the issue with the springs.
And we've got no time left on the radio station, but I'm going to clear off. This is WKDW Radio 97.5 saying thanks for joining in, and join us next Monday for another special guest. But I'm staying live on Facebook and YouTube right now. Thanks, and have a great evening, and be safe this weekend. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
So I'm still live. I'm still live on Facebook and YouTube.
Can I make one more comment then?
100%. That's why I'm sticking around.
On Facebook. So the conclusion of that is one thing I can guarantee, Chuck, and the other people who are worried about our other parks being developed. I can guarantee you, if we don't adjust our land use to have more commercial industrial as part of our land use in the city in 20, 25, 30 years when we're built out, I can guarantee you this city will be selling off parkland as a way to balance its budget. I can guarantee that because we see it in other communities in a similar situation to ours in the United States.
So let me ask you, I'm going to do this a little bit different. I know that the Warm Mineral Springs is in dire need of attention.
Ugh, have you been out there?
I yes, and I've driven by and done all those things, and it, when I say it needs attention, it needs attention. Okay, so it's beyond the let's go check it out. I want you to appreciate what it is. It's whenever you take someone there now, they're like, why don't we fix it? If we don't fix it, why don't we just tear the buildings down and get rid of it?
Right.
That's the responses. Okay. So whether Chuck likes to hear it and that group likes to hear it, that's kind of the presentation that we have of our park system. And it's not representation of what a great job our park system and the city has done putting lipstick on the pig. Okay. And we've been doing that for a long time.
The lipstick is off, by the way.
Yeah. The lipstick is definitely off right now. But so I'm going to ask two questions here a little bit. And I want to talk about the growth of the city the right way. With the business side of things. If we don't get there, what happens if we don't get there and we have this park? Where's the $20 million or $28 million going to come from if we don't get creative? Other than the dream and this throwing out the same BS we've been throwing out for 10 years, that we're going to go ahead and get the grants. We're already trying to find those. I mean, it's this fantasy land. Let's stop talking fantasy. Let's talk real facts here real quick.
Okay, there's so much to that. So
I know there is.
I'll start over here. If I start meandering, pull me back to make sure that I address some of your things. But what drives me on a day-to-day basis is the fact that 8% of our land use in the city of Northport is currently zoned for commercial industrial. So I'm going to use the term commercial to mean everything from retail to office to industrial, et cetera. We'll just call that commercial. Now, experts who study this stuff as a profession advise municipalities and counties that in order for them to be able to balance their budget they need to have about 20 to 30% of their land use commercial. And why is that? Because at a general level, businesses, commercial pays more in taxes than they consume in city services. Residences, on the other hand, consume more in city services than they do in city taxes. So when you play that out and you're built out and you're lopsided in terms of not enough commercial to help balance the tax burden of running a city, one or some combination of the following three things happen. Your millage rate goes crazy. You start cutting city services to balance your budget, or you start selling land that the city owns. And we don't own much land. So what that typically means is parks. You start selling parks. So, or some combination of those things to balance the budget. So that's really the issue. And that's why what few opportunities we have to increase tax revenues for the city that don't fall on the homeowner or the property owner, it's essential we do that. And again, that's a very forward thinking thing. So those are at a very high level, the economics of balancing a city budget. We are required to do that by state statute. However we do it, we have to have a balanced budget as we start the year. And now, John, you had introduced a couple of other things. Did I address
I did.
those?
I for the most part you have, I think, but here's kind of what my thought is, and you correct me, because I'm, as every citizen out here, I'm trying to wrap my head around not having 15% or even 15% on the books of possibility in the business side.
Right.
Okay. We're sitting at 8, and you want 18, and we need 20 technically, but I'm shooting for 15.
I think getting to 18 will be a real stretch.
Well, I know, but can we even get to, do we have the capability of getting to 10% before? No, I mean, do we have it already on the books at 10%?
No, we have it on the books at 8%.
No. And do we have anything projected within the next 5 years that gets us to 10%?
Well, we're looking at rezoning the city and increasing the percentage of our land mass that is zoned for commercial uses.
Correct. And that will help draw things in. But do we have anything on the books right now that you can look at the citizens and say, we're going to be at 10% by 2025?
No.
So how are we going to pay for Warm Middle Springs if we don't find another pool of money somewhere? Okay. Unless we pay for it through taxes from the citizens, the residents, because we don't have enough of the commercial side to kind of help that out.
Make sure I also address grants. I just remembered you had introduced grants.
I did.
So here's what happens with parks. And this is what sometimes gets people confused. We built the aquatic center, for example, using surtax dollars. So in the past, people have kind of used surtax as their Mad Money account or their vacation account. Or I think most people try to have a little stash. So if they want to do something that normally they wouldn't be able to afford, they use that fund. But once we built the aquatic center, so when commissioners say we didn't burden Northport taxpayers to build that aquatic center. That's generally true. We use that sales tax money to build it. But what people don't understand, the maintenance of that property once it's built comes out of the general fund. And what monies go into the general fund are property taxes. So whenever we decide to operate something at a deficit, and I was not a supporter of the aquatic center. The commission made a decision. Now I'm a supporter of the aquatic center. We collectively made a decision that in order to keep it affordable for the majority of people in the city, we would operate it at a deficit. On the best year, the best year will probably lose 300,000 to 400,000 a year just on the aquatic center. And that money comes out of the general fund. The more we do that, the more pressure we put on the millage rate. So I'm not questioning that decision. I'm just stating facts. So enter Warm Mineral Springs. That is probably, of all of our parks, and don't quote me on this, but of all of our parks, the one with the most commercial potential. That doesn't mean I'm supportive of covering that entire 60 acres with cement and building things. I'm not. But Warm Mineral Springs has the potential to become an extremely unique holistic health, alternative health center that adds other assets to the property with that goal in mind, so that people who will never go in the springs, there are a lot of people that are never going to go in the springs, find other things to do of value on that property that enhances their health. So if
also generates what?
Revenue for the city, for the general fund. So the intention, so let's go back to the costs. So what precipitated the whole P3 thing, because I think folks have forgotten, the commission had voted to put $9 million in the kick for Warm Mineral Springs to do two things: bring water and sewer to that area and to renovate the buildings. When we, of course, with, again, the decision-making process of the city takes a while, and then you go out to bid and blah, 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 blah. Between the time that the commission decided to allocate that money for those purposes at the Springs and we went out to bid, that $9 million was now $18 million. When I share that information with people, sometimes they don't believe me, but look at your property value. If you're renting a property or you buy eggs, how much have they increased in the past 2 or 3 years? Government is no different, and construction in particular has been extremely inflationary. So $18 million, who's going to pay for that? If the city does that, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. So we're really getting to a point, and this is Barbara talking. I'm not speaking for anybody else.
Can I interject here just for a second? Yeah. Because I want to layer something with you, and it's really the grants. We have been, as a city, we have grant writers. I've heard people say they're just not qualified. Okay, so stop. Do you know how hard it is? And listen, Chuck, we're arguing. Actually, we're having a discussion right now on the most creative way to keep the park.
Right.
It's not. So let's sell it. It's how can we keep it and come to some sort of mutual understanding that it has to kind of help cover costs,
Right.
or we're going to let the park absolutely deteriorate but beyond belief.
Mm-hmm.
And then there aren't any grants. We as a city, have we not been looking for
We've been
grants?
looking for money since 2014, since we acquired that property.
And how many grants have you come across? 10, 20, 4,000?
I don't know. I would have to research that for you. But one of the things I have learned just in listening to our grant staff and participating in meetings around what grants are available to communities that were impacted by Hurricane Ian, there's a common thread to those grants, and that is typically they may help build something. They don't help maintain something or cover operating costs.
Yep.
So, I mean, at this point, and I haven't gotten a final answer from staff, post Ian, I'm not even sure if those buildings can be renovated. My gut tells me, having looked at them, they're going to have to be torn down. Even they have a historical designation, but there's not much to restore.
So I'm going to throw something else out because it's something that Peter said earlier.
Yeah.
So the group that's out there, Chuck, that wants to keep the park and not have a P3,
right?
Go find a way to pay for it other than tax dollars from the citizens. Because if we put that on a referendum, do you want your taxes to go up to pay for the park of Warmiller Springs?
Right.
You're going to lose and lose huge. And so put your money where your mouth is, because the city wants to keep the park.
Right.
Peter wants to keep the park.
Yeah.
But Peter and most of the city and even the city manager and commissioners don't want to spend tax dollars, even surplus tax dollars, on a park. That if we make it a money generator, we offset those costs. So it's not hurting anyone. It's actually supporting. And there's no one that's going to come in with a P3 and destroy Warmiller Springs.
What would be the point of that?
Because they got to keep it right in order to make the foundation strong. That's why they're coming. So having a group of people that keep touting, let's just go get a grant. No, I throw down the gauntlet right now. I love the concept of going to get a grant. Go find them, turn them into the city, and let's get them written, and let's get it done.
Show me the money.
Get your plan together. I'm tired of words. Words are words. Grants and paying for things without tax money is the conversation that we're actually having. And there's no one on this screen right now or involved in any of these conversations that want Warmiller Springs to go away.
No.
We just got to find a way to do it.
And I'll tell you, I could talk about this for another hour. I do have another call. So I've got to leave, but I think I'm on the agenda with you, John. And
I think so. I think you are coming up.
I think I'm the commissioner of the month in June. So we can continue talking about this or anything else.
We'll tee it up. And Chuck, I appreciate you, brother, and get your team out there and find more grants and find a way to pay for the park without being a surplus conversation or tax dollars, and bring it to the table. The third Monday of the month when you're back, right? Yeah. Third Monday of the month. So I'll be sending that invite out there. Let's keep it going. Keep the conversations real, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Barbara, thank you so much for being part of the show. Peter and Chuck, thank you guys so much for participating. And as always, Chuck, I look forward to having coffee with you, buddy. So I'll talk to you guys later.
We'll see you all later. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.